Now we're reading from Mark chapter 9, and I'm going to read from 33 to 37. We're going to go a little bit beyond that as well, but just for now. Mark chapter 9, verses 33 to 37. And they came to Capernaum. That's Jesus and the whole gang of disciples. And when he was in the house, just look at the wisdom of Jesus. Because, if it was me, I would have fled out right on the road. But Jesus waited until he got into the house. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he began to question them. What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent. For on the way, they had discussed with one another which of them was the greatest. And sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wants to be the first, he shall be the last of all, and the servant of all. And taking a child, he set him before them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one child like this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. Mark tells us that they didn't answer him. He asked a question. What were you discussing along the way? They were really arguing. Other versions will make it very clear. They were arguing. There was an argument going on the road. Jesus asked, what were you arguing about? They didn't answer because they were ashamed. As long as they thought that Jesus didn't know, it seems reasonable. But when they realized, you see, if they've been discussing about how to have a better prayer life, or how to serve God better, they would have been so eager to tell Jesus, yeah, Jesus, this is what we've been talking about. Now the discussion had not been something as deep as that. They weren't talking about how we can live a more fulfilled, deeper life for Christ. No. Lord, we just had the greatest discussion. Now we know how to pray better. Now we know how to serve you more completely. They would have been anxious to tell him about that, but they kept silent simply because they had argued about which of them was the greatest. You see, they knew what they were doing was not right. These are the men that walked with Jesus, talked with Jesus, stayed with Jesus, heard him teach about humility, heard him teach about being of no reputation. Here are they, right behind his back, talking about greatness. Who is greater? Who's the greatest amongst us? You think they would have learned? They went to the best teacher, to the best school. I myself, many times, in total despair, hold my head and think, does anybody listen? Does anybody hear anything? Does anybody learn? But I get comfort when I look at the Word. How did this thing happen anyway? Why were they arguing about who would be the greatest? Mark doesn't tell us. But may I suggest to you this morning a possibility? Do you remember what happened shortly before they began arguing about who was the greatest? You'll find the answer in the first 12 verses of the 9th chapter. You see, Peter and John and James had just come down from the mountain of transfiguration. They had seen Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah. That even heard the voice of God himself from the cloud saying, "This is my son, in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." It had been a great and wonderful, inspiring experience for the disciples. But as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus cautioned all three of them and said to them, "Don't tell anybody what you've seen and what you've heard until the resurrection." Now you know as well as I do that keeping a secret is a tremendous burden. When somebody tells you don't tell anybody, it is a very burdensome thing. It's in you, it's bursting forth. But you are told not to tell, so you try every trick in the book to say, "I know something, but I'm not supposed to tell you." Now this is where we must use our imagination just a little bit. The Bible doesn't mention it, but I can just imagine something like this happening. Peter, James, and John, very excited after this tremendous experience. And maybe Peter says something like this. He says it nice and loud so that everybody else can hear it as well. "This is the most wonderful thing that's ever happened in my life." James adds on, "Oh, for me too. I don't think I'll ever forget this. I've never seen anything like this before." And then the youngest of the three, John, chimes in and says, "I hope we can go back to that mountain tomorrow. I'd like to see that again." And now they're saying all of this loud enough in front of the rest of the others who don't know anything about what's happened. And they're just speaking in riddles. You know that game. You played it too? Now when the rest of them heard them talking like that, can you imagine their curiosity? "What are you talking about? What did you see?" Then Peter might have replied, "Well, we really can't tell you. Maybe someday, we'll be able to tell you, but Jesus wants only the three of us to know about it, and he told us not to tell you about it." This is making big fire here. If Peter really said something like that, then I would almost hear Andrew responding, "You think you're pretty great, don't you? I was the one that introduced you and brought you to Jesus. Now you think you're better than me. You think you're more important than me. I brought you. If I didn't bring you, you should be still fishing. If it hadn't been for me, you're not really important as you think you are." Maybe Peter would have responded and they would have said, "Well, wait a minute now. It's my enthusiasm and my zeal that keeps this whole group going. All you fellas are dead. I'm the one that brings life to this place. The rest of you would have given up a long time ago if I wasn't here." One after the other, they must have proclaimed their own greatness. How they so greatly enhanced this little group. Amazingly enough, they thought that Jesus knew nothing about this discussion, but he knew what was in their hearts. Even though they didn't answer his question, Jesus knew exactly what they've been talking about. So he began to talk about greatness. Just the thing that they love to hear about. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, in verse 35, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and servant of all. Notice that Jesus did not condemn them, neither did he rebuke them for desiring greatness. He did not say that it is wrong to want to be great. He did not say that it is wrong to want to succeed in life. I believe that God has given us all that inborn feeling, that inborn wiring that wants us all to succeed in life, to be great in whatever we can do. Jesus doesn't say that it is wrong, but he defines what greatness is. And this is vitally important for all of us. What is greatness? Because that's what the world is saying, that we must all be great. That's what all the different televangelists are teaching. How to be great, how to be rich, how to be powerful. What was the message of Jesus? Jesus said that true greatness is found in service, in concerns about others, willing even to be the last one, instead of putting yourself first. Now this is contrary to what the world teaches right now. Jesus is teaching about greatness. The world says that greatness is measured by how many people serve you. Greatness, according to the world, is measured by the number of lives that you control. Is that not true? But Jesus says that true greatness is measured by how many people you help, how many people you serve along the way. It's not how many people serve you. True greatness is when you can strip yourself down, take a basin of water, kneel down at the feet of people whose feet are filthy and smelly, and wash their feet. That is true greatness. If we're really serious about being Christians, we really have to do some changing in our thinking. We really have to do a total turnaround in our minds. Being a Christian will change the way we look at our jobs. Being a Christian will and must cause us to change how we look at one another. It will change the way we look at society. It will change the relationships in church, in our community, in our areas. Jesus was a master teacher, and he knew that a visual aid would be the best way to teach so that nobody will forget his lesson. So Jesus calls a child out from the crowd and puts the child right up front. I can almost imagine Jesus putting his arms around this child. Now we've seen lots of pictures and artists have painted the scene, but I wonder how realistic their paintings are. Many have portrayed this little child as some angelic little being, blonde hair and blue eyes, and artists have even put a little halo over his head. I really doubt that a Jewish child had blonde hair and blue eyes. I have little doubt that that child was really so angelic, because I'm convinced that the average child would be mischievous, dirty, troublesome, all kinds of things that you can think of. This is the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach. So he calls his child and he brings his child up front. Jesus says, if you really want to be great, here is what you have to do. Welcome one of these little children in my name. And when you do that, you're really welcoming me. And not just me, but the one that sent me. Now Jesus teaches us here that we are not to be respecters of persons. We must not respect people. We must respect really him. Don't now go around saying you're not supposed to respect people. There's a different respect we're talking about. You get the message. Why did Jesus use a child as an object lesson? Well, someone said Jesus used a child because a child really can't do anything for us. A child cannot really enhance our position in society. A child can't add to our success. On the contrary, I believe a child demands things. Every mother and father knows that when we become parents, we begin to learn the real meaning of serving. You don't know what serving is until you become a parent. I know even in my deep sleep, I was taking care of my children. Because it is so inbuilt in you that they are always there and you are called to serve them. Even though you might have had a very hard day, even though you might have been working all day, they can teach you how to serve at night without pay. And you've got to walk up and down as if you need exercise, with a little weight in your hand that gets heavier and heavier all night through. Every parent knows that. Everyone knows. When you are a parent, you learn how to serve. We quickly learn about sacrificing ourselves, our time, our energy to meet the needs of our child. The moment we become a parent, we start giving and giving and giving. When they get to 18, we still give. When they get to 20 and 25, we still give. When they get married, we still give. When they get children, we're still giving. That's service. We find ourselves giving for the rest of our lives. So Jesus took the child and said, this is what I'm talking about. A child can't do anything for you. A child can't make you more important in the eyes of the world. But a child can teach you what ministry is all about. A child can teach you about service. There's a second visual aid brought in here that almost seems to be unattached, but really is not. Jesus said, welcome one of these little children in my name. And then we see that John interrupts him and says, teacher, in verse 38, we saw a man driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he's not one of us. These guys don't really get it. Right in the middle of a message on greatness and on serving, they interrupt. You see, what he's saying is really, Lord, who gave this man permission to speak in your name? He hasn't been traveling with us. He hasn't learned all the things that we so painfully learned over these times. With you, we sacrifice so much. He had no right to do this. jealousy creeping in? Greatness creeping in? How is it that this guy can do all of that? But in verses 39 to 41, Jesus replies, do not stop him. No one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us. I tell you the truth, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to Christ will certainly not lose his reward. Now, how does that fit into what Jesus is talking about? He's saying, here is a man who's very much like this child. He has a lot to learn. He may even seem to be an embarrassment to us, but he's honestly trying to serve, and he will be rewarded for it. Don't hinder him.